reached the sixth sign of the Zodiac, and this is the sign of Virgo. Virgo tends to start around about August the 22nd, August the 23rd of the year. It's the last sign of the summer season. So it is a mutable sign, and it is an earth sign. And so when one understands the cycle of the year as seasons, then the everything has grown. The produce has appeared on the trees. You know, the harvest. It's the harvest time with Virgo. The summer is almost over. You know, by the end of August, and so as the sun goes through Virgo, it starts to cool off quite a bit. And there's a sense of everything that the crops are being prepared. So in ancient times, and even today, you know, the harvest occurs. Things are brought in from the fields, harvested from the orchards. The barn doors are opened, the threshing floors are set up, and the wheat is sorted from the chaff. The good bits are taken out of the Virgo harvest, which are then used for consuming there and then, or for storing, or for selling. So the whole nature of Virgo is to be the sign that is about analyzing something or critically looking into something to find it, to how good it can be, or to perfect it. So this literally is the idea of sorting the wheat from the chaff. So it's about harnessing things or harvesting things. It's about finding things in the details is very Virgo. So as an archetype, one can see Virgo very much like the craftsman or the critic. It's very much one of its keynotes is purity. You know, what's the best bit, or how can they make themselves to be the best at what they do? So they are also very, very much into the idea of service, how they can be helpful to others, as well as just serving the collective, if you like. So these are incredibly important things. So you get very sober-minded people who tend to be Virgos. Quite a lot of they're drawn very much towards things like science, but also just being perfect or being really good at something. And so perfectionism is what they seek, but they can be very critical to themselves if they don't think they're being good enough. So that is a challenge for Virgos to work through or to understand. And so they often take something very literally, and they can also deeply examine things. They get right into like the details. So of an object that would be associated to Virgo would be the microscope, as would be the telescope as well. They like getting into fine detail of things. So the Virgo is often the sort of person who you would find being the one who has the very marvelous power of discrimination. A Virgo tries everything in the furnace of criticism, shall we say. It gets right into, you know, it needs to see it, to analyze it, to work it out, to calculate it, so it separates, it sifts, it classifies, it arranges things, it looks at things and recognizes the potential value of something. So it's this idea of classification, for example. Like, for example, Virgos make good librarians, and so they like to organize the work that is entrusted to them, and they like to be to make the best practical use of everything around them and everyone that they come in contact with. Generally speaking, they have a very good brain to hand interaction. And they work very well with craftsman-based things. So you can get carpenters, for example, and tradespeople are very Virgo, because accuracy and method are extremely important for a Virgo. So they tend to have quite a clear head about things. And in that way, that makes them very good, like managers, because they're quite good at sort of sorting things out and arranging or organizing things. So, and that makes them shine as public servants or civil servants. So you get a lot of Virgos in those fields as well. They are very good. They're very qualified in bearing burdens. So they tend to be they can get quite anxious and very responsible about their work. It's an earth sign. So there's a strong sense of a methodical purity and practical application to everything. And so they quite like to be given important undertakings. They like the responsibility. And if you were to look at, say, an example for a society of things, you'll always find so there might be a president who would be, say, a Leo or something like that. The vice president might be the sort of Scorpio type person, or the Taurian would be the treasurer, but the Virgo would be the secretary. So Virgos make very good secretaries because they get into the details and they do all the hardest work, and they don't get that much thanks for it. Virgos often like, oh yes, they just naturally do it because they attune themselves to it, and they're very good at that. So if they fail in their duties, then whatever structure they're involved in can possibly fall apart because they're that much of an important key to it all. They sort of virtually run the thing, but at the same time, they get very occupied by their practical details, and they love that. They really enjoy that because they like helping others. So there's a sense of like an earthy sign. It has qualities similar to Taurus. It's being useful, being of service, being practical, and there's a sense of the Virgo is very much sometimes doomed to work without the reward or appreciation that it deserves. Virgos are the sort of people who would do stuff behind the scenes, and then they quietly say, "Well, actually, I did that. I helped you with that." That sort of thing is a very Virgo kind of approach to life, and they are actually at their best when they don't have anybody else to disturb them. When they're in their studio study or their workshop and they're doing their thing, they don't have a lot of patience for the other underlings or assistants or apprentices and things like that. They just they don't like other critics either. They need to get on and do their thing. So you often find Virgos who have a very say a detailed workshop in something. They're particularly good, making something very, very precise, or very, like a horologist or something like that. Might have work at making clocks work and things like that. It's a very detailed set of practical concerns that really keep them very busy, and they like to be kept very busy. So the Virgo is often they would dedicate their whole lives to the service of their fellow people, and they would quite toil unremittently at things. The Virgos are literally the service industry, you know, so they're the cleaners and you know, they do a lot of stuff like that, you know. So I mean, there's two ways of looking at this, you know. But there's the Virgo craftsman who's an absolute perfectionist and makes amazing, beautiful things, jewelry, for example, you know, or gemstones, or you know, maybe cutting gemstones or something like that, you know, very Virgo. Whereas the other side would be a window cleaner or something like that, you know, who just does the job. But they do it relentlessly, day in, day out, you know. So there's a sense of that both of those things are in that realm of Virgo, if you like. So sometimes the Virgo doesn't get particularly well paid for what they do. They can be the sort of again, you know, you might find someone who's incredibly expert at something, but they may not have manifested the sort of really successful business around themselves or something, you know, but they do beautiful work, or they do something really, really special. So that is also sometimes of the nature of Virgo. And so they get a lot of satisfaction from helping others rather than working for their own benefit. So, and that is the key to Virgo. There's a quality there of the self-sacrifice. Now, Virgo is the opposite sign to Pisces, which we're going to be covering in a few months' time. But that idea of doing things for others is a very strong theme, so that'll be something that we'll cover later on, though. Really, the basic Virgo is to understand it is that they're not necessarily particularly lavish in what they do, in their affections and things like that. They're quite demure or prudent or shy, and then there's a sense that they can be, you know, when it comes to things like relationships and stuff, Virgos will be quite picky about their relationships because of that ability. You know, they want, when they choose a relationship, they want it to be a really good one. And they would be sort of quite you know, trying to perfect on the idea of a relationship. So they're not necessarily a sign of great fertility or progeny. They would be maybe, you know, they of course they can have children. If they do have children, they're likely to dedicate their whole lives to bringing up the child. Rather, you know, that becomes a strong focus for them. So that's tends to be a sort of Virgo thing as well. So you know, throughout history, we get a lot of good examples of Virgos and things. They tend to be this sense of being just having a sense of genius, you know, being very industrious, being very prolific, and just that just the super perfectionist in such a way that is helpful or benefit to others. So the Virgo, however, though, we get Virgos who aren't necessarily as evolved as others. And they're the ones who tend to be quite harshly critical towards others, would project a lot of their own criticism outwards. Whereas the more advanced Virgos would have a very clear vision that they're trying to bring to the world, and a fine discrimination in what is right and what is wrong. The less evolved Virgo would be the one who only sees the impossibilities and the flaws, and so you would probably notice the difference. You know, if you put two people, Virgos, together, one who is more fine-tuned than the other, and you'll notice the difference. And so in a way, there's a sense of the well-refined Virgo, the evolved Virgo, doesn't necessarily ask for praise or doesn't expect it, and then the unevolved Virgo would never give any praise. If you see what I'm trying to say there, they'd be like a kind of slightly they'd be too critical or overly analytical. So it's very natural for Virgo to be quite a worrying sign. It can have its challenges in there. It can be quite inhibited, and so it gets very devoted to a particular subject. So a specialist can be very Virgo, and that, of course, in the field of medicine, for example, specialists in certain fields. They tend to find faults in things which they want to correct or fix, and they can do that to people or in relationship as well, so that they would only end up falling in love when everything is just right. The sense of perfection again comes through very strongly. So the one of the difficult parts of Virgo is its idea of how it can be quite narrow-minded in its thinking patterns. It sticks very much to one channel or one way of thinking, but this, of course, becomes a strength because it becomes a speciality. So they can have a very clever and critical approach to things and seeing the future and planning things out. They're quite good for the 5-year plan. A Virgo, a good Virgo can set up a 5-year plan and follow it, because they have a sort of objective, pragmatic, a down-to-earth approach, and whilst being quite shrewd but also flexible. The mutability of Virgo is that it allows for change and adaptation and variation. And the idea of the mutable signs, Gemini being a mutable sign, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. So these are the mutable signs. So there's this idea of always allowing for the ability to have a change in something. And that flexibility, that variation, and that adaptation is one of their great strengths. So a Virgo might be an inventor and invent something, and then they have version 2 and version 3, and all the time improving, all the time getting it better. And that can be someone with planets in Virgo. So it's this idea of always getting it better and perfecting it is important. So they are quite because of their ability to analyze things and discriminate things. They also very good with finances, or they can be very good with finance. So they make good economists. They tend to be the sort of people who can be, but sometimes maybe a little bit over fussy, or too focused on the small details without seeing the bigger picture. And so really that's a lot about a Virgo there. They health-wise, they tend to be very healthy. They tend to be a sign that is, they notice what's going on in themselves quite a lot. They're very fine-tuned to that. And of course, that can be hypochondria or something like that, but they tend to be very aware of their body. And the 6th sign, or which lends association to the 6th house, as you'll see later on, is that the awareness, the bodily awareness, the physical vehicle is very important. And so therefore a sense of keeping clean, keeping tidy, keeping neat, that sort of thing. Cleanliness is next to health or godliness or something, of that nature. They can be very precise and know what they like. They know what they like. So in a way, they tend, as I said, to be very healthy. But they must be aware of overwork or over absorption of their tasks. That's what makes them worry. So in a way, a Virgo can be a sign that worries because it gets too drawn into the details of the task it's trying to achieve or trying to perfect on. So there should be, of course, they get sometimes so into it that that can lead to a skeptical or unsympathetic attitude. It's the kind of person who might have been a civil servant for 40 years, doing the same old job, and then they get a little bit work weary even of the same thing, and that can take a lot of the spontaneity or the joy out of what they do, because they've become overly practical, for example. But generally speaking, they tend to be a healthy sign. The area of the body to do with Virgo is the abdominal and intestinal areas. This is all ruled by Mercury, and that's why people have a gut instinct or a second mind. That people have a feeling nature to do with that. That's actually linked to the solar plexus, which is a very super sensitive area of transmission or receiving information. I think there's a lot to do with things like the chakra system, and that sort of sense of super sensitivity of that area is very related to Mercury and to Virgo. So what they might look like, Virgo tends to be quite wiry, quite strong, quite well built. They have this ability to endure long, steady hours of work, and without the sort of physical fatigue. Virgos are very good workers. When they find something that they like to do, they'll go on and on and on and on in it. So the hair color is usually brown or black. The eyes can be quite clear, but colored hazel or gray. They tend to have quite a small mouth. They tend to have quite a long nose, and they tend to be they seem to appear to be intelligent or keenly critical. And so they can be faultless. So it's almost like that sense of perfection can come through with Virgo sometimes, but at the same time a little bit icy, because they're quite cool in their earthiness. And that is very much a sense of Virgo. You've got your one-page insights as well. I think I've got a nice selection of charts for you to look at this evening, all very Virgo charts. So I feel that we'll probably move on to those and start to discuss those a bit. And maybe we can look at some of the idea of what the Virgo words are. And so, in a sense, I think orderliness, intelligence is very Virgo, analytical things. So I think there's probably quite a lot of Latin words that are very linked to Virgo, I have a feeling. I think the Roman Empire was very Virgo oriented, as well as being very Marsy. I think it had a strong element of Virgo-ness. But so Latin, I think, would be a very good area to look in for that. Now, I've got my first chart this evening here. So we'll go through the charts. The actor Ian Holm, who featured hugely in a lot of movies. He actually died aged 88. So had a good innings. He died last year, actually. But he had a very good innings, 88 years old. So therefore, remarkable good health, you see. So, but he was a Royal Shakespeare actor, and he really came to prominence he was a late bloomer with respect to really getting noticed by Hollywood. But he was the older Bilbo Baggins in all the Lord of the Rings films, and in the Hobbit films in the early 2000s. So you'd recognize his face as the older Bilbo Baggins. And he also, the film I always remember him being in is The Fifth Element, with where he was the priest in that Bruce Willis film, The Fifth Element, which was a kind of science fiction adventure, and he was the priest in that. And but he had a lot of roles. Very adaptable actor, and you'd instantly recognize him, of course, if you saw him. Just think of the old Bilbo Baggins on the Lord of the Rings. And but as you can see here, he had a stellium in Virgo, so he's Sun with Venus conjunct, Sun with Mercury quite wide, Mercury with the Neptune, and the Moon in Virgo as well. Not sure of his time of birth, so can't be sure about the angles. But to have, as you can see, there five planets in Virgo is quite a strong stellium there. So I would say adaptability at acting, a long life, and always probably improving on his craft. His acting got better and better the older he got, to the point that by the time he then got noticed big time. In his later years. So quite interesting in that respect. The next person I've got is Nile Rodgers, the music producer, guitarist. So he was in the band Chic, and the the famous New York disco from the 70s. He has a very Virgo. I always associate. See, the way he plays his guitar is how I would see the Virgo-ness. He has a lovely jangly sound that's very quite unique. And I've watched him on a TV biography, because he's also gained a lot of fame recently. He became Madonna's producer for a while, and that's where he really established himself. But now he's highly sought after. But he has a particularly neat way of playing the guitar. He only plays the middle strings, I think. He really plays like and I'm not a guitarist, but there's a particular way and a very meticulous sound that he makes, that once you hear it, you know it to be his, and it has a slight jingle jangle to it. It's a lovely funky, it's a funk sound. He's a funk player. And so he's got the Mercury ruling Virgo, Mercury and the Sun together in Virgo. And this I'm not quite sure if it's I don't have the time, so it's at 12 noon time. But that Mercury Sun, I think, is important there. And he's a music producer. He's made a huge fortune from acting as a producer, because when you do music and you become a music producer, you get a share on the royalties of the records with the artists. So he's a producer. And look, he's got Sun and Mercury in Virgo trining very closely as well, Jupiter in Taurus, so very earthy. He probably has an incredibly practical approach to things, to getting things done. But that's the producer as well, because, of course, Taurus is the producer. So there's a lot of earth here. You see, he's got a lot of earth. And then the planets in Libra add the music, So the musician, who's also a producer, Jupiter and Taurus, trining planets in Virgo. And he was in that band Chic. That's how he made it first. Those disco hits, which were for some reason, I sense that as being quite Virgo as well. You have to listen to some Chic, then you get what I'm talking about. And that's where you'd hear that funky guitar. So, and then we got Lance Armstrong. Okay, so the cyclist, he won the Tour de France 7 times. Every time. I think he won it for every year for like 7 years in a row. But the phenomenal part of him was that he actually, now we talk about health here, this is a guy who had severe cancer before he raced in the Tour de France. He then cured himself of cancer and then won 7 Tour de France's. So this is an incredibly powerful someone who would adjust and variate his life accordingly with the Sun Pluto. Okay, so the Sun Pluto is that invincibility. He got taken down into the darkness, into the great underworld. His health matters, and his Moon Mercury there, super sensitivity. Moon Mercury very sensitive to what people would say to him, probably, particularly with that Mercury square Saturn and Saturn squaring the Moon. And then that Sun Pluto, you see, so he would have put himself through the crucible of fire many times, but in a Virgo way. He got severe cancer. He had 4 or 5 rounds of chemotherapy. I mean, you just need to read a bit about him. incredible, that he survived all that. And then he went on to be a world record cyclist. And then he got caught up in the drug scandal with the doping, with the things that made him cycle relentlessly, So he then, and that kind of obscured his personal heroism, right? Because he'd won his battles. He'd won so many battles in his life, and already, to them. So it's an interesting character. He's a very interesting character. But 4 planets in Virgo. 4 planets in Virgo. And then we turn to Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, with the Sun-Venus conjunction. So this is when you've got a planet very close to the sun, it goes under the sun's beams, and sometimes the person themselves doesn't know, or under the sun's beams, it's difficult to actually access that planet or really recognize how it works in your life. But Venus makes beautiful things, and he made an incredible music composer, along with, but he needed the rest of his band to really shine, of course. But there was an incredible composition, what they did, and of course the album that they made, that was a great work of perfection. And it still features today. Dark Side of the Moon is still in the top 100 records, I believe. It's something that every college kid in the States has to buy. Kind of, it's or whatever. Everyone's got a copy because it's such a well-produced record. And with him here as the Venus Sun conjunction, making a square to the Mars Uranus conjunction in Gemini, and this, of course, is the electric guitars. Okay, so because Uranus is electricity, Mars, it looks like a guitar, and they have Mars amps called Mars or Marshall. It's all no. I believe there's no coincidence there. It's all the archetypal symbolism, but a lot of very famous 1960s and 70s rock musicians have the Mars Uranus conjunction in Gemini. So whenever Mars came around here, every 18 months, Uranus was 7 years in Virgo. And every time Mars came around every 18 months and conjoined it, what became very famous guitarists in rock bands were born. Just happened to be that way. Jimmy Page has got this, Richie Blackmore's got this. I mean, they're all got it, right? This Mars-Uranus conjunction. And Roger Waters has got the Sun with Venus squaring those points. So his destiny was, well, the electric bass, and so that's an interesting, yeah, they make a very interesting to study the Pink Floyd band to look at their charts. It's quite interesting actually, because of what they created. That immensely incredible creative work of art. But there we go. Yeah. So Sun Venus, and then we've got Martin Freeman, the actor, who also Lord of the Rings, younger Bilbo Baggins, funnily enough, also Virgo, but also many other films and also television series. He's now, in fact, one of England's probably leading actors. He has the Sun Venus in Virgo, with Mercury speaking there. These planets in Virgo have to answer to Mercury. So Mercury's in Leo, which would be drama. So anyway, but another Sun Venus, very modest, quite demure, always comes across as the modest, shy one. He very much his part of his characters and personality in how he acts is as that slightly shy sort of character, and that's that Venus in Virgo, Sun Venus in Virgo, because Venus is in her detriment in Virgo. We got Chrissy Hind of the Pretenders, and this is an accurate chart. This is a spot on chart, 10:20 a.m. Now, of course, here we've got several planets in Virgo. And the 11th house. I mean, this is a great example of the band. Okay, so the band is a group. like a group of friends, but it's also a group of professional musicians who are, and they're in the band together because they're doing something that's career based. So that's 11th house. But you often see a successful band members will have very packed or very focused 11th houses. So if you know, because that tends to be because they're in a band, they're a group or they're associates, a group of friends or associates, and they're taking it into a career mode. And so Chrissy Hind here in The Pretenders. So crisp, very crisp, good radio play. You know, writes good songs. It's very good radio play, and has a very distinctive voice. So that's the Mercury with the Venus, Sun. That's a stellium. So that's a grouping of conjunctions together because they all kind of link up, as it were. And so that's the 11th house of band. So you can look up. There's another band one coming up in a minute, actually, which is quite interesting. So there's that's and Virgo, I would say, is good for formula. It's a very good formulaic, and that's what pop music is. Pop music is very formulaic. So Virgos are mathematicians and equations and things like that, physicists and scientists and things. But musicians also work to a formula. Verse, chorus, verse, chorus, or however they do it. 3.5 minutes. Is it that's your pop song? And there's a certain specific way of doing things. So it can be that that there's a precise way, and that's quite Virgo. So that's what I'm trying to say there. That's why you can see, maybe here's a very good example. The band she was in, she moved to London to make her career work for herself, and that's where she took off because it wasn't necessarily, she wasn't making it in America. She moved to London, everything changed, and so she got into that post-punk thing. But it's the quality of the pop, I think, is a very, and for some reason another one's coming through that I must look up. From the band Texas, Charlene someone, I have a feeling probably has Virgo planets, because I'm for some reason I'm just seeing a link there that I must sometimes I get intuitive, I guess, about that, and I must go and look that one up. Thanks. I will go and do that anyway. So we also have Cameron Diaz, and now we got to Mars. So we've got a Sun, Mars. The way I do these charts, by the way, as you probably recognize now, is I pick out the sun signs, because the sun is how that person shines, and then I match it up with all the other planets. So I give you a selection. So I'm showing you all people with stelliums or groupings or at least conjunctions with all the planets, but always with the sun sign there, because that means that you understand or can see the qualities of that sign coming through more strongly. So with Cameron Diaz, well, this is an accurate chart, 2:53 a.m. in San Diego. She has the Sun-Mars conjunction. Sun-Mars conjunction can be quite pushy, it can be quite sort of direct, but I think that's probably part of quite a lot of the roles she plays. She's a comedian, really, does a lot of comedy or funny movies. And with that Neptune, maybe, there's a little bit of a slight mysterious quality to her, but there's something about that she's that sun Mars is look at this. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Oh yes, and not looking at the chat window, and Nile Rodgers did invent the funk guitar. Absolutely, he did. And Charlene Spiteri, thank you. That's it. Yeah, absolutely right. So absolutely. I have a feeling, Virgo planets, but we'll see. I have to look her up to look at the chart. But this is this Sun-Mars conjunction in Virgo. Look at Cameron Diaz's films and think about that. Quick, snappy judgments could be Mars, quick, snappy. Quite maybe a little bit argumentative, a little bit pushy, a bit assertive. She's quite a tomboy, isn't she? right? Like Cameron Diaz acts quite like the tomboy. Yeah. So that would be that sort of Mars equality coming through. Yeah. In how she shines, should we say? Okay. So, and then we've got well, here's an accurate chart as well. This is Liam Gallagher of Oasis. This is a Sun Mars. He's a Sun Mars, right? But with Mercury there as well. And of course, the thing about him is his attitude. He's got a rotten attitude, really, hasn't he, for a rock star? I mean, he's rude, he's abrasive, he's pugnacious, he's all these things that people go like, how the hell did he get to be where he got to be? And yet, it's so some people like that, I guess, in people, they buy his records. But he had an attitude. He definitely had a Sun Mars attitude. That to me is someone who is a bit annoyed or a bit angry about life, particularly because the Sun squares Saturn, and so does Mars. Okay, so in Virgo, he's got these Virgo planets here, and Mercury's at 29. Mercury even kind of widely squares Saturn. So here's someone who's got a chip on his shoulder, quite literally. He feels very heavy. Saturn weighs down a lot of his Virgo qualities, and it gives him quite a snarl or a sneer. He's quite like that. And I think that's what he got known for, and he would, he there you go. I think you know what I mean when I speak to this. You can see him standing on a microphone doing what he does, and you can hopefully sense that Mercury, Sun, Mars quality to him. Okay, a bit critical, and a bit picky as well. Stephen Fry, the literary critic, is actually a Sun Mars, and he's also a Pluto Sun. Look how that Sun is exactly conjunct Pluto, and then with the Sun Mars here. Now, here's someone, if you listen to him talking, he doesn't take opinions from any other people. He won't. He thinks he's the sort of person who actually has to be in control, and that's a kind of Sun Pluto, right? You'll notice that he won't. He doesn't. He. I think he's someone who so strongly believes in his own opinions, and this is Sun Pluto, Mars, and Mercury in Virgo. Okay. But of course, he comes across with immense charm with his Venus and Jupiter conjunct in Libra. But there's a very, very deeply critical part of his personality where when he says something, he's right about it. And that's what I would say is noticeable. That Sun Pluto very strong there, So all or nothing kind of character. Barry White, the singer. Barry White, who sings with the incredibly deep voice, has Mercury with Jupiter with the Sun in Virgo. So Mercury and Jupiter, of course, is the voice, the loud, because it can be a big sound or a big noise or big communication. Eighth house meant he did things to people that were strange emotional undercurrents. Let's say people would be like, what is that guy's? His voice is special. It's different. He's someone very, very different. This is an accurate chart, by the way. 16:42 p.m. Galveston in Texas, 12th of September 1944. And here we have Mercury and Jupiter at 9 and 10, Sun at 19, squaring Uranus in Gemini. So here's someone who had a unique resonant voice. If there was ever sound waves, this is the guy with the sound waves that he would sing, and incredibly famous for it. He did something that was very special. He had a gift of communicating very deeply to people, but just his voice, really, it's the voice that did it. But there was something very special about that, and in Virgo, it was almost like the sense of going to lower octaves where there was perfection in the lower realms of communication as well, something like that. He did something very unique and different, and so I'd say that's something to do with that Mercury Jupiter, definitely squaring Uranus, definitely. Something a one-off, should we say? A unique person. And there's, of course, with these charts, by the way, there is so much more to say about the charts. I just give you the Virgo bits, because, if I was to say, well, of course, he's got the moon in Cancer on his descendant with, I mean, that takes it to another level, of emotion and feeling, and how he would sing with feeling, but I'm just doing Virgo today because I'm just giving you the Virgo influences, And now we get to Patsy Cline, the country music singer. Patsy Cline was the first ever famous female country music singer. So she was before Dolly Parton. In fact, actually, she had quite a tragic life. She had about 20 hit singles. She was always on the Grand Ole Opry, the radio station and television show. She had the songs Crazy and I Fall to Pieces were her two biggest hits. And she really was a legend already. She was a legend because she was the first female country music singer. But very sadly and very unfortunately, she died in a plane crash around the same sort of time. It was a different year, I guess. But Buddy Holly, anyway, one of those people who would have had an amazing carried on had they survived, So yeah, she didn't. She had an early exit from her life, but left legendary status. So with here you've got Jupiter with Neptune and the Sun in Virgo in her fourth house, third, fourth house. But she was very. She was a really good songwriter and very influential. I'm sure Dolly Parton would cite her as being a particularly good influence to her own career, and had some great songs. So you can hear the songs in film soundtracks today and stuff like that. They're quite famous. Still get the radio play, and but yeah, Patsy Cline. So very Virgo, you see. And worked very hard at what she did for her short career, because she's only famous for a few years before the plane crash. She put out so much music in a short time. And now we've got Bill Murray. So Bill Murray, acerbic, sarcastic wit, brilliant actor, really. I mean, because he's deadpan, isn't he, and very flat in his humor, but he always delivers a great punchline, and he's a Sun-Saturn conjunction in Virgo with Venus and Mercury. So he probably calculates and thinks about very carefully how to deliver his timings. He's in the film Ghostbusters. He's one of the Ghostbusters people. He's in Groundhog Day. Lost in Translation is a brilliant film. If you haven't seen that, it was a great film that he's in. So he does comedy. He was on the Saturday Night Live crew in the late 1970s. So he did Saturday Night Live with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, that sort of time, when it was really, that was probably one of the best, the most funniest years of Saturday Night Live. That launched his film career. But Ghostbusters, I guess, is the one that everyone thinks of when they think of him. So, but that Sun Saturn, you see, is he works very hard at his craft. He's a funny man, and he works hard at the craft, at perfecting the joke or getting it right. And 4 planets in Virgo sees to that. And so he's like someone who'd be like, right, and he delivers it so very well in a Saturnian way, which is quite cool, cold and he stands back a bit to deliver something that's then quite hilarious. So yeah, that's his style. And so there we go with Bill Murray. Next time you see something of him, think of that Sun Saturn, and the Saturn Mercury, of course, you know. So all very much part of how he does things. The last chart I've got for you today is a Sun Uranus. Okay, I don't know if you've ever heard of the band the Cocteau Twins from Scotland from the 1980s. They were kind of post-punk band. Did a lot of very Virgo-y music, drum machines with tape loops and all sorts of weird phaser and flanging guitars. And her voice, Liz Fraser, had a beautiful voice, incredible voice, in fact. It's quite haunting and dreamy, and it was all made up words. It was all her own language, like some strange sort of mystical Celtic kind of channeling strangeness. No one could ever work out quite what she was saying, and but it was like her voice became a musical instrument. But and the reason I picked her chart because she is a exact Sun Uranus, and Uranus is uniqueness, and the sort of revolutionary, or the surprising one, or the unexpected one, or the inventive one, even. And she was also incredibly shy. So it's Venus Sun, and Venus being the very modest and shy. The Sun in Virgo and Uranus there. So that little collection definitely added to helping her create a rather unique sound. And if you do ever want to listen to some interesting ambient-y kind of music, then try the Cocteau Twins on YouTube, because it's very nice, interesting music,